playoff hockey. Emily Kaplan does a great job covering the NHL for ESPN. Kind enough to join me on the Boardwalk Honda hotline on this Wednesday. Emily, good to talk to you. How you been?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for a couple moments. Let's get right into this Pens Flyers series. I thought going in it was going to be a tough matchup for Philly. You have to figure out a way to control and contain Crosby and Malkin, and you can't give the Pens any type of power play chances. Well, it's funny because they kept him in check the first two games on the PP, and then Pittsburgh goes 1 of 8. They don't panic. They make adjustments, and then boom, in that 5-1 victory in Game 3, they had 3 power play goals. I just think right now this is just a terrible matchup for the Flyers going forward, and now you have to deal with the injury to Couturier as well, which was a bizarre incident.
Yeah, no, that's definitely unfortunate. You can watch it 100 times and cringe every single time. But I was at games 1 and 2 of this series in Pittsburgh, and I think you're right. I think Game 1 especially, I felt like the Flyers were playing really well, but made some really kind of boneheaded mistakes in giving the puck up, and Malkin and Crosby just totally exploited them. And moving forward in this series, I think it's going to be difficult, especially if Couturier can't play. We also have to remember that the Penguins could be missing a really big weapon in Patrick Hornquist, who's definitely out for Game 4. He's huge on the power play. When he's in the lineup, the power play is more than 26%. That's what they hit at. When he's out of the lineup, they're less than 13%.
Yeah, it's a great point you bring up, and I know Sullivan didn't. He wasn't too specific, and we know in hockey when we talk about the injuries, they don't give you too much. It's always the upper body injury. But you're right. He played. He was about 21 minutes of ice time in that Game 3 win, and I think had an assist on Crosby's first period goal. It's a funny series because when you look at, I don't want to say the Flyers. I think when you go up against a team like Pittsburgh that maybe hasn't been as dominant this year as they were in years past, trying to go for that three-peat. If you're Hackstall, you got to figure out a way. Let me switch up the lines a little bit. And what does he do? You look at that trio that he finally breaks up after the first 26 games of the season because the Flyers were struggling. Then they had the most dominant line in the NHL with 25 goals among them. So I think now you're starting to shake up that line, but now you can't really do it because you're going to go with Giroux, Voracek, and now because Coots is out, you're potentially now you have to adapt a little more to try to get a top line going into tonight's game.
Yeah, I think adaptations, if you talk to any Philadelphia fan, that's probably their biggest criticism of Coach Hackstall. They don't like the way that he can be kind of stubborn with things, and you're seeing that play out here. But then sometimes I think his intuition is right, and I think there's no better example than sticking with Brian Elliott for Game 2. Brian Elliott was definitely the scapegoat in Game 1, but at the same time, it was a defensive breakdown for him. So I'm curious to see what the line shuffling looks like. I think their depth is tested, and unfortunately, as Pittsburgh hasn't been as dominant as they have been in previous years, and you said, their depth is amazing. Yeah. I mean, they have probably the top 3 centers down the line. If you go from Crosby to Malkin to Derek Brassard, who they got at the trade deadline, that's really hard to match up again.
You mentioned Elliott. He's kind of had a very strange series, right? He gets lit up in Game 1, allowing 5. He comes back, and he's solid with 34 saves in Games 2, and then he gets torched again in Game 3 by allowing another 5 goals. You know this, right? You always, when you have games like that and you lose right away, people want to say you got to make a change. You got to make a change in net.
Right, totally. And I think the other thing you have to keep in mind is it's Philadelphia. It's always going to be about goaltending, right? Yeah. And I think that the problem is okay, you go with Elliott, who's probably the more trusted guy all year. He might still have lingering injury effects. But is Mrazek that much better or that much of an upgrade, or the guys going to want to play behind Mrazek? And I think they really do respond to Brian Elliott. So I agree with the decision of sticking him out. He's not going to be the all-world goalie. He might not win you games, but he could, potentially save you games.
I thought if they came out flat in Game 2, that this could have been a sweep. And then you turn around and they show some gumption and some heart and some fight in Game 2, but then they get routed again in Game 3. Listen, we know you don't want to go 3-1 in a series. Well, first of all, maybe Flyers fans will kind of go back to history and say, well, we've done this before, but it's always tough to close out an opponent if you're Pittsburgh. Maybe that's their thinking. But the bottom line is, to me, if they lose tonight, I just don't know how they're going to respond knowing that they're down 3-1 and everything they're potentially trying to throw at Pittsburgh is not working.
Yeah, I do see this as a crucial game. And when I look at Pittsburgh this year, there's something about them that it almost feels like they're trolling the rest of the league, right? The first couple of months of the season, they were playing at this malaise. They were, just kind of scooting by. And then when they need to turn it on, they do turn it on. And I think that's what we're going to see here in the series, where they can cruise by games and they can drop one like they did in Game 2. But when they need to turn it on, they're going to, and I don't think Philly has that extra gear.
Are they, in your mind, Pittsburgh, are they as good as the last those last two teams that won back-to-back cups? I mean, you look at 2 years ago and you look at last year. They won 48 games 2 years ago, 50 games this year, 47 this year. Are they? Do you believe that they still have this run in them if they were to get past the Flyers?
I think they have the capacity for a run. I don't know if they're the outright dominant team we've seen the past 2 years. Defense is obviously their deficiency. They don't have a lot of depth there, but. The one thing that I think is understated is just how much playoff games they've played. Sidney Crosby has played, I believe it's 48 extra games of playoffs in the last two championship seasons. That's an extra half of a season, an NHL season. While the rest of his peers are resting, he's out there, shoving and getting shoved and going through the grind. So I think that's the effect that we're starting to see, and maybe they have the same talent level, but the wear and tear is going to get to you, and that's the reason no one's three-peated since the Islanders in the 80s.
Yeah, that's right, and they had that great dynasty as well. I mean, again, that's a sore spot for Flyers fans because they still think Bobby Nystrom being offsides. Right, right, exactly. Emily Kaplan joining us on the Boardwalk Hunter hotline, covers the NHL for ESPN. How about the Capitals last night? I mean, that was one of those. I love overtime hockey when you talk about playoff hockey because it's a white knuckler. And listen, they were on the fringe here of basically staring down the barrel of a 3-0 deficit, but they get the big win last night over the Blue Jackets 3-2 in overtime. They pull 2-1 in that series.
Yeah, why I love playoff overtime is that if you watch that whole first overtime, the Capitals were dominating it. They were getting all the scoring chances. The Caps had nothing. But then when, guys start getting tired and your legs get heavier, it's anybody's game. And that goal was not the prettiest goal I've ever seen. In fact, it might be one of the uglier goals I've ever seen. But it was a goal, and it saved Barry Trotz for another day.
What do you think of the season that the Golden Knights have had, and then they turn around and they sweep the Kings? I mean, in your estimation, is this the greatest season by an expansion team in all of sports?
Yeah, I don't think there's a parallel at this point. It's funny, I feel like people are sick of hearing this is the first time Vegas has done this. They've set this record for this. Like, we get it. They've set a ton of records.
Yeah, exactly right.
Okay, we get it. But look, it's pretty remarkable. Obviously there's the caveat that they had a more favorable expansion draft than we've ever seen before. We have to give them credit for gaming the system. They were so smart, George McPhee, the GM, about what type of players he wanted to get. How he orchestrated these trades with other teams and made them overthink it. And they're just playing free. It's really, I hate to use this analogy, but it's like they have house money. They're not scared of anything. And at this point, I've asked my editors to stop making me predict anything about the Golden Knights because it's just foolish at this point.
You bring up a good point, too, because some of the moves that they made. Look at Fleury. Look at McNabb, who comes out last night and scores against his former team in the second period. I mean, it just... And you're right, everyone throws a stat. They become the second team to win their first 4 playoff games since the Penguins in 1970. We know everything they're doing is going to be a first, but it's a nice story. It's first time, okay. Let's see what they do going forward. Are they a legit contender here to win the Stanley Cup?
I think they are, in the sense that they have a lot of the qualities that you see contenders have, right? Fleury's playing out of his mind right now. He didn't play a lot of hockey this year. He was injured a little bit, and he's really rested. And his save percentage and goals against average is ridiculous right now. They've been really stingy. I know the Los Angeles Kings are a team that had secondary scoring issues behind Anze Kopitar, but they didn't let them have pretty much any goals. They were generating shots, but they weren't getting many goals. The Kings are a really good defensive team, so I think if they just get their scoring up a little bit, anybody's game, they can make a run. But I think they're just going to have to get through this Western Conference. They probably have a little bit of an easier matchup getting the Sharks or the Ducks. But once they get either the Predators or the Jets, they'll really be tested.
Last one before I let you get out of here. You look at the Devils and the Lightning. How much pressure is on Tampa Bay? I mean, not just for this series, but going forward, because they're heavily favored in this series.
It's a great question. I think the Devils are a team that are just excited because they arrived ahead of schedule, right? So no one expects them in the series. If they put up a good fight, great, but they're set up for the future. Whereas the Tampa Bay Lightning doubled down. They had the best team in the NHL for almost the entire season. They made big splashy moves at the trade deadline, getting pretty much the entire Rangers roster. And here they are, and they're expected to win. So I think there is pressure, but T.J. Yzerman does not succumb to that pressure. And what's crazy about them is they have one of the best prospect pools in the NHL.
Right.
So let's say they don't do great this year, they're set up and poised to be a powerhouse next year and the year after that.
I just look at Tampa Bay, though. They are, listen, top seed, far more experienced team in the series, and I think at the end of the day, when you're a team like that, it usually is what you're not doing on the ice as opposed to what the other team's doing to you. So I think, to me, and you know this, right? All of a sudden, you get a series tied or you fall behind, guys starting to tighten up a little bit. They're not as loosey-goosey. They're not playing with house money. And then that's what happens when you get the careless mistakes, you get the turnovers, you missed opportunities with scoring. And you in hockey, that's the beauty of hockey, because you get that one shift change, you get that one series, that one flurry where the team just wakes up and they have that goal, or they're down 2 and they score that goal to cut it to 1, and all of a sudden the momentum changes. So I think this is one of the more intriguing series in the playoffs.
Yeah, I think the big thing to watch with the Tampa Bay Lightning right now, especially Game 4, is their discipline. They were a little sloppy and took a lot of penalties in Game 3, and that really damned them. So as long as they keep it clean and keep it disciplined, I think they'll be okay. But you're right, like, they can't let the tempers get the best of them.
And what about Johnson and Callahan? Are they going to be out?
It's unclear at this point. I haven't checked this morning.
Okay, all right. Great stuff, Emily. Keep up the great work. She's a great follow on Twitter, at Emily Kaplan, covers the NHL for ESPN. Appreciate a couple moments. Hopefully we can get you back on again.
Sure thing. Have a good one.
All right, you got it. Emily Kaplan joining us on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline.